Every magical tradition is a set of repeated actions used to bring about a desired effect. Techniques are created and used over and over in different forms. What those techniques consist of are determined by environment and culture. These are the magical techniques of the ancient Egyptians. Hey folks, this is James, aka Threscurnis, and welcome back to the Scroll of Thoth. As I suspected, the chemo treatment's slowing me down a little, but I'm feeling okay. We're going to power through here. Going to have some more videos for you. I think I've come to a conclusion how this video series is going to work out. I think we're going to have one more video on this topic here on the YouTube channel, but I'm also going to create a video that might be a little bit too spicy for YouTube. That's going to be only for our Ko-Fi subscribers, and that's going to be a video on drugs in ancient Egypt. So I really hope you sign up for that. Going to get that video. Another thing some of you might already know is that the hosting service that used to host the old Scroll of Thoth podcast is going under first of the year here in 2023. And so I've decided to move all of those podcasts over to our Ko-Fi page for monthly subscribers. So check out the link down below for our Ko-Fi. One other announcement for you. Hopefully, if my health holds out, June 2nd through the 4th, I will be presenting at Toad Fest, which is at Our Haven in French Lick, Indiana. It's a new camping festival for us. The whole Emergent Magic crew is going to be out there. I'm going to be doing a seminar in ancient Egyptian magic and paranormal and the occult. So, hey, join us. I'm sure it's going to be a great time. But let's dive back in here with our exploration of ancient Egyptian magical practice. And, of course, we're following along with Robert Craik Rittner's book of the same name. Maybe throwing in a couple other extra things as well. So these next couple chapters, Rittner starts focusing on different techniques that ancient Egyptian magicians used, common themes in their magic. And it starts out with the continuation of the Egyptians' oral fixation. And I say that with some confidence. They do seem to have had an oral fixation, of course, for the spoken word and the written word. We talked about incantation, and we talked about how the word was the power of magic in and of itself. But other things that were done in their magic is spitting, licking, and blowing. And spitting seems to have been a huge part of ancient Egyptian culture. Spit itself. And it almost makes me think of Frank Herbert's Dune, if you're all familiar with that. So here's a people who are ostensibly living out in the middle of the desert. Yes, they have the Nile, and they have a fresh water source that's dependable, but still they're out in the middle of the desert. So I think that maybe water itself was of paramount concern to the ancient Egyptians, and why spit was so important. Now, Rittner sees spittle as analogous to semen, as in using semen as a generative force. And we see this in Egyptian mythology. We see this in the creation myth of Heliopolis, and the sun god spits out Shu and Tefnut. Quoting from various inscriptions and sources, Rittner. O you whom the pregnant one spat forth. O Adam Kepri, you spat out Shu, you expectorated Tefnut. Atum spat me out as the spittle of his mouth together with my sister Tefnut. Raise yourself, Ray. Spit out the day. His name is one who spits out the inundation. And spit has a lot of different uses in ancient Egyptian magic. And we'll see spells that refer to spitting as a blessing, spitting as medicinal, with spit being able to cure baldness, blindness, and wounds. Rittner here pulls from the coffin text and from some other sources. I have come that I may spit on the head and arm, cool the scalp, and ease the leg of the ailing great god. I make firm the heads, vertebrae, and necks of the gods. I spit on their shoulders. I am one who Apep detests, since I know how to spit on Ray's wounds. I see, for I am one who spits on wounds which will heat. When Ray's eye was sick as a result of having been weeping for its mate, then Thoth would spit upon it. I am appeased, Sati, with the spittle of the earth god, and blood from Geb's marrow. May you spit on your elbows, your hand, or your foot. Here's something for you folks. You see in that last quote there where it begins with NN. And you'll see that in translations of ancient Egyptian texts, Greek texts, just about any kind of scholarly translation where the NN, or sometimes just a single N, is where you're supposed to insert the name of the practitioner or the person who is the object of the spell. So you'll see that in grimoires and other places as well. Just a little heads up, that's how you read that. And we'll see in more examples that Rittner gives that spit is not just one thing. It's a tool, and it can be used for multiple purposes. It can be used in defense. From quotes, I have warded off Seth for you. I have spat on his confederacy for you. I am the spiller at the prow of the bark. I have come to provide protection for Cyrus. I have repulsed Apep. I have spat on the wound. Spit can also be used to transfer curses, which is a magic I think some of us are more familiar with, spitting as a curse. But spitting is not good or bad. It is simply a tool, and an important tool in ancient Egyptian magic. And, I'm not the kind of guy who likes to spit, but there it is. It is important. Another common element in ancient Egyptian magic is blowing, which is probably my favorite alternative for blowing. In fact, my favorite banishing of all time comes from the Coptic magical papyri, which goes setwa, setwa, semniao, away, away, all traveling spirits. And then afterwards, the magus blows and drives the evil spirits away. But blowing, once again, just like spit, is just a tool. Blowing can also be used to infuse the spark of life. And along the same lines, you're also going to find a lot of licking in ancient Egyptian magic, all the way from the pyramid text through the Greek magical papyri. Licking as a part of spells. According to Rittner, the PGM has no less than 5 spells that include licking, including one called the Mithras Formula. Write on a leaf of the Persea tree the 8-lettered name as given below, and having kept yourself pure for 3 days in advance, come at morning to face the sunrise. Lick off the leaf while you show it to the sun, and then the sun god will listen to you attentively. Now this is the name. Ai, O, Aya. Lick this up so that you may be protected. So as we see, the ancient Egyptians saw much of a magician's inner power, much of what goes out and comes in through the mouth, in the form of words, in the form of spit, in the form of blowing, in the form of licking. The mouth, is the greatest tool of the ancient Egyptian magician. Now, while the mouth might be a magician's greatest personal tool, it is the manipulation of images that is very much at the core of ancient Egyptian magic. And Rittner seems to go back and forth on this and whether or not he's likening it to the voodoo doll. And I only use that word because we kind of all understand what it means. It represents sympathetic magic. It's not an actual tradition. You'll find puppets and dolls, and we're going to talk about what the ancient Egyptians used. But, that concept is what he's getting at. And to illustrate it, he starts out talking about the Greek magical papyri and the spell that tells you to form a wax figure and pierce it with 13 nails. And there is actually one of these wax figures in the Louvre that you can go and see. And he traces this kind of manipulation of images all the way back to the Narmer palette. And one day we'll get into the Narmer palette, but what it is it's supposedly showing the first pharaoh of Egypt uniting the two kingdoms. And the image shows him with bound captives. He's holding his mace, and these bound captives are waiting to be executed. Horus looks over the scene, insinuating that it's a victory for Horus as well. And Rittner goes on to speculate, the king's sacrifice of the kneeling captive, like the palette which records it, is offered to the god not to commemorate the conquest, but to perpetuate it. Rendered tangible and permanent in stone, the image was designed not simply to reflect, but to create reality, guaranteeing by sympathetic magic the victory of the state and the gods. So pervasive was this image to become that the exterior walls of virtually every Egyptian temple were provided with a rendition of the scene, which rapidly acquired more of a ritual than a historical validity. And this is another thing, this motif of the bound prisoner that goes all the way back to the first dynasty and up into the Greek magical papyri, as and statues that have been found depicting the enemies of Egypt, the Nubians, the Libyans, the Canaanites, etc. And the images of these bound prisoners would be found repeatedly in Egyptian architecture especially around door sockets. Quoting Rittner, representing a prostrate captive with his arms tied firmly behind his back at the elbows, the door socket supports the peg of the door leaf by a hole bored into the middle of the prisoner's back. The motif of the simple voodoo doll has here become architecturally ritualized. With peg for pin, the figure is pierced not once, but eternally, for with every motion of the door leaf, the peg is ground deeper into the back of the hapless prisoners. And you'll also find other examples of this type of imagery, numerous depictions of captives being trampled underfoot. Especially you'll see this in a palace. You'll see it in engravings on the floor. You'll see it, and this, once again, this is a motif that goes from all the way from early Egyptian histories until the Roman period. And one can find images of a pharaoh's bound enemies engraved on the soles of their sandals that we found inside of tombs. And any place where the pharaoh would walk, there would be images of the enemies of Egypt that the pharaoh would trample upon them. And we also see many religious images of Horus and other war gods trampling upon their enemies. Rittner quotes from the pyramid texts, Geb has put his sandal on the head of your foe, who flinches from you. Horus has laid hold of Seth, and has set him under you in your behalf, so that he may lift you up and quake beneath you. Horus has stretched out for you your foe under you. Horus has caused Thoth to bring your foe to you. He has set you on his foe's back that he may not thwart you. Take your place upon him. Go up and sit on him. Do not let him escape from you. So this motif of the bound prisoner, like I said, it starts in early Egypt, goes through Ptolemaic Egypt and beyond. And while, the images at times look very similar, it doesn't really imply magical intent. But Rittner kind of closes the gap, giving us the example of what's called the excretion texts. And this is where lists of enemies would be inscribed on clay pottery, sometimes with the images of bound prisoners again, and these are ritually shattered and buried. And archaeologists have found pits full of these things. And once again, this is another kind of sympathetic magic. How these images would be purposely put on jars or other clay objects, clay statues would be made, and they would be shattered intentionally. In fact, the creation of these statues and their inscriptions were so common that Egyptologists have this standardized, what they call the rebellion formula. Every rebel of this land, all people, all patricians, all commoners, all males, all eunuchs, all women, every chieftain, every Nubian, every strong man, every messenger, every confederate, every ally of every land who will rebel or who will plot by saying plots or by speaking anything evil against Upper Egypt or Lower Egypt forever. That was the inscription that was placed upon this statuary. Another popular Egyptian ritual that we have a lot of evidence for is something called the breaking of the red pots or the breaking of the red vases. Bearers of these red pots would walk around the tomb of an individual, of a pharaoh or high-ranking official, and the offerings would be held in these red pots. And once the offerings were given, these pots were then smashed, and it was considered a way of inflicting terror upon one's enemies. In fact, you'll find a lot of Egyptian magic where the color red is associated with anger. The color red is associated with violence. And of course, you can see the connection there between red and blood. But I think for the Egyptians, it went deeper than that this is an environmental thing. Keep in mind, the Egyptians at times called the land next to the Nile the Black Land, and the land beyond the Red Land. The desert was called the Red Land, and the Red Land is filled with demons. The Red Land is where Seth creates his storms. Red is considered an ill omen, and people with red hair are considered to be disfigured. Another common motif that you're going to see in a lot of these magical imagery, and we've showed this before when talking about ancient Egyptian wands and ancient Egyptian demons, is many of them are inscribed with a knife, a pretty simplistic rendition of a knife. And you can see other engravings where these knives are used to cut names, cut prisoners. So this knife imagery, using the image of the knife even, when you're not using an actual knife or nail or something to destroy a symbolic object, you're using just the image of the knife. And figurines were used throughout different types of ancient Egyptian magic, and figurines were not used only for like a type of cursing or for attacking one's enemies, but they were also used for defense. They were used for love spells, a whole bunch of different things. One thing that surprises me is in Rittner's book, he does not mention the Shabti, or sometimes called the Ushabti, which are the little statues that we have spells from the Book of the Dead, older sources, how these statues were enchanted and they would become your servants in the afterlife. So that's another use of figurines in ancient Egyptian magic. And speaking of the dead and magic involving the dead, of course, the ancient Egyptians' ancestor veneration was just a pillar of their culture. And magic was often done by beseeching the dead, by writing letters to the dead. And the dead were seen as intermediaries between humans and the gods. Concept that we see rolls all the way up until modern times, even now in the Catholic Church. But letters to the dead with requests have been found. Some quotes here that Rittner's found in various inscriptions. "Please become a spirit for me before my eyes, that I may see you fighting on my behalf in a dream." I think that's kind of poetic. The dead were also asked to perform love spells and curses, and sometimes the offering bowls would be inscribed with these letters to the dead, along with those red vases that we talked about. But some of the permanent offering bowls would also have inscriptions with requests from family members, or from if it's a pharaoh, if it's someone of high position, it could be anyone making this request of the dead. So that's a pretty long look at different techniques that ancient Egyptian magicians used. Certainly not all of them. Certainly we could go deeper into each one of these, but I want to speak a little as to why they're important, why they're important to me, and why they might be important to you. Because it's a language. To me, this is what the spirits recognize. They recognize these actions. They recognize these techniques. And so I use them. I don't slavishly copy them. I don't feel the need to do ancient Egyptian spells word for word, try to recreate them verbatim. Obviously, I have my own goals, my own thoughts, and my own perspectives as a modern person. But just to get the flavor, just to talk to the spirits in a language that they understand. I think that's why it's important to learn these techniques and why they're important to incorporate them in your magic, because the spirits are eternal. They remember the ancient Egyptians, and perhaps by using a language that they understand from their friends from long ago, you can speak to them and become their friends. Thank you so much for watching. As always, you got to like and subscribe if you want to see more of these. I appreciate every single person who watches to the end. Thank you. We're going to have one more of these, and we'll see you next time.